Okay, and we are recording. So, again, thank you very much for supporting the book club. There were some issues with the formatting of the book, as well as some grammatical errors that I paid an editor to spot for me. And so when I did the second review, I didn't catch them because I just did a surface because I paid an editor to catch them. So my wife has been catching all these things. So Dr. Davis, thank you so much. But what I want to do is I want to apologize for those grammatical errors that are in the book and typographical errors. And I want to say to each of you who are a part of this book club, one of the ways that I will show my apology is I have another book coming out in March, late March or April. It's called UnBoxed. The purpose of this book is to really discuss how we can actually, from a clinical perspective, improve our family functioning. Goes much deeper into family communication. So that's the second book called Unboxed. And as a gift to all of you who are part of this book club, I'm going to give that to you free of charge. Okay, we're about to go live right now. So we are live on Facebook. I want to again thank each of you. I want this to be more than just your traditional book club in that we just simply go through the book and try to retain information. I want this to be an opportunity as well for us to form a group here where we actually begin to find ways whereby we can improve and strengthen our own families and those who are joining in and tuning in, where they can also improve their families as well. So I want this to be a forum, a support group, whatever however you want to word it, where we not only go through the book, but we also look at ways that we can improve our families' functioning. And so we're going to be going through the book with an eye towards improving all aspects of family functioning. With that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. The introduction, the purpose of the introduction was to demonstrate how unique the modern family is and to establish the importance of the family. And so I want to begin us kind of looking at the introduction. And I want to throw this question out first to everyone, and we'll get started there. How do you see the unique structure and formation of the modern family affecting how families function? One of the first things the book talked about was that the modern family has more formations, structural formations, than any time in history. And so I want to ask, how do you see the unique structure and formation of the modern family affecting family functioning? And does the unique structure play a role in how families function? And I'd like for you to tell me why or why not you believe this. So how do you see the unique structure and formation of the modern family affecting how families function? With all the new ways, aunts raising their children, all that stuff. So I'm going to allow this, because our group is smaller today here, I'm going to allow folks just to jump in. And while you're preparing to jump in, I'm going to ask my sister who's on here, Mitchie. Mitchie, would you do me a huge favor? Would you monitor anyone on Facebook who may be sending in any questions? We want to encourage that. If you are joining in on Facebook, we want to encourage you to shoot out any questions that you may have, etc. And we will engage with you. You may have comments or feedback. Just go ahead and share this. And my sister Mitchie is going to let me know if anything comes in from Facebook from any of our folk that are watching there. Okay, so the first question was thrown out. I'll ask it one last time. How do you see this unique structure that the modern family has, where it's no longer mother, father, and 2.5 kids? How do you see that unique structure and the unique formation of the modern family affecting how families function? And does this unique structure play a role in how families function?
Before anyone answers that question, I just want to say I'm not seeing your stream on Facebook.
Okay, it should be under my Season with Grace. It's streaming to the Season with Grace page,
Gotcha.
which is facebook.com
Got
forward
it.
slash SWGUnboxed.
Got it.
And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put some of these questions in the chat. I'm going to put the first 3 questions in the chat so that you'll already be ready when they come on up. All right. So I'm opening the floor. I want to hear back from you, those of you who have read the book, as you've been thinking through how the modern family structure works and how it looks and how it's so different than it's ever been in our world's history. Talk a little bit about that and how it affects the way the families function. This new way that families are structured, how does that impact the way the families function? I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Well, Pastor,
Yeah.
this is Regina.
Yes.
Um, as I was going through and reading the introduction, and I was thinking about how I grew up. I grew up in a two-parent home, and there was no communication.
Mm.
But yet, I have always been the communicator.
Okay.
So I look at how my sisters and brothers are. Um, some of them were single parents. My brother, as a matter of fact, was a single parent, and then he married. But there was never no communication. But yet, with me, and when I was married, they felt like I communicated too much.
Mm.
And so, yes, I wound up being a single parent because I guess I talk too much, or if I see there's a problem or it's going to be a problem, I always say, okay, we need to sit down and discuss this. And it's like, well, it's not that important. I say, right now to you, it's not important. But if we don't discuss it now, it's going to become a problem. Then to find out later on, it was a bigger problem. But then it's like, it's too late to discuss it to them because I didn't force the issue.
So, as I'm listening to you, one of the things that I'm hearing is that we can have a traditional family structure, which is again the mother, father, with two and a half kids. That was how it was back in the '60s and the '50s, and
Right.
we can still have some challenges even with this. So, just having a traditional family doesn't necessarily mean that the family is going to function the way the most ideal way to put it better. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
All right, I'd be glad to hear someone else's thoughts on that. Okay, I'm gonna have to start calling on folk. I have my sister here. She's on task here, but I want you to get started. I referenced you at the beginning of the book, and I talked about our family. And you and I come from a very unique. Well, it's not. I'll be honest. It's not as unique as I used to think it was. It's somewhat traditional now within the African American community. But we were raised in two separate homes, even though we're brother and sister. So I'd be glad. Do you think that that had an impact on the way that our family function, or just on the way that families function in general? I think you're on mute still.
Sorry. Yeah, of course it did. It definitely affected us. We, especially growing up in two different households, because you learn one way of a household. Like for instance, I'm growing up in one household. I learned one way, and then you come together and you're in a different household. So the way we communicate probably is totally different. So we come together, and I'm trying to do what I learned, and you're doing what you learned, which there's several times you've had to check me and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what we do, or that's not, you know. So definitely you're learning two different ideas and ideals from families when you're in two different households. And then trying to come together and communicate after that is tough. Especially add in more siblings. You got step siblings, add that in.
And then it ends up bringing into two whole different dynamic families. So my father has one side, a whole. I have cousins and stuff on my father's side that is not you're not even related to. Then on the other side, you have cousins and stuff that I'm not related to, which I just want to throw in here. Your family has always treated me like I was blood kin. I don't know what it is. I think it's because they think I'm such a handsome guy, but they've always treated me. They've always treated me like I was blood kin, and I've always appreciated. I've told you this before. I've always appreciated that. But there is still that reality. There still is that reality. I want to hear from someone else about how the way the family is structured, the way the family is, the structural formation is, how that impacts the way the family functions.
This is Dr. Davis, Denise
Hey.
Davis. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about is getting away from the idea of quote unquote traditional, because even as you talked about the formations of African American families, um, I don't think there's anything that we would say is traditional, mother, father. 2.5 children and a dog. With regards to me, I grew up in a single household, but before that, I grew up in an immigrant household where I was the child of someone who had gone away to another country. And so I was being raised by my aunt and uncle who had their nieces and nephews along with their own children. And there was one time, I think she had her grandchild. So communication in that family was very complex in that everything funneled through my aunt, with a final say so being my uncle. And then having to be raised in a single family household, you don't have as much layers of communication that needs to occur before a decision is made. How it has changed the function of, how does it affect the functioning of the two different households? I would say that things move faster as far as decisions are made faster. There is a lot of dynamics between cousins and siblings and mother, father. So, when decisions are happening, I think the biggest thing was decision making.
All right. And we're talking a lot about communication, but there's other areas of family functioning, and communication is very vital. That's what this book is about. But there are other areas of family functioning as well, that is impacted by how the family is structured: financial decision making, how we interact with extended family. Someone says in-laws and outlaws. All of those things play into, in some ways, I believe, how the family is structured. And I want to kind of piggyback a little bit more off of what you just mentioned, Denise, about being from an immigrant family. So when we talk about immigrant families, once you get to America, you're African American no matter where you're from because of the color of your skin. And I think we can all agree that there's a certain uniqueness about African culture. All Africans of the diaspora. I'm quite surprised when I talk to my wife about how so many similarities there are between African Americans from the East Coast, African Americans from the Deep South, and African people of African descent from the Caribbean. There's so many similarities. So let me throw this out to everyone who is here. In the book, I shared with you some research about how the African American family has more structural formations than any other ethnic group in the nation. One of the downsides is that that 70% of all children born in African American homes are born to single moms. And so that's one of the downsides. But there is a certain uniqueness to how many structural formations, how many different ways, whether it's being raised by an aunt, whether it's being raised by grandmother, et cetera. It's just so many of them. There's more than any other ethnic group. I want to ask you, how would you describe the African American family, and what do you believe makes it unique? Beyond just its structural formation, how would you describe it? Someone says, describe the African American family. How would you describe the African American family, and what do you think it is that makes the African American family unique? And I want to go to someone who is a family expert. Chanel, jump in here and bail me out. How would you describe the African American family?
You would put me on the spot.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert. We just work a lot with families, and what I see in each family that we work with are very different dynamics. I would have to say that what makes African American families is the complexities, how they really consider themselves as families. African American we do a lot of what I call adoption of folks in our families. I was actually having this conversation with my mother yesterday. Everybody, whether blood or not, is kinfolk if they're in your village. You always got Uncle Bubba down the street, and as you grow up, you trying to figure out, look at the family tree, where Uncle Bubba really fit in, and really don't fit in. He just happened to be a real family friend that you call Uncle Bubba.
You know.
There is some, I would have to say there's some complexities because not a family in the African American community is not defined just by blood relations. It's
Yes.
by relationships. And so I guess for me, I would just use the first word that popped in my mind was complex.
Complex. Wow, that's a unique, that's a strong word. I'd be interested. I want to hear some other perspectives. I haven't heard from you, Mary. I'd be interested. How would you describe the African American family? I heard one word is complex. How would you describe it? And Mary, you're still on mute.
Hello.
Hello.
I would say sometimes it's difficult.
Okay.
Sometimes it's difficult when you start to blend families. And I was raised in a two-parent household, and all the children are of one set of parents. But but being married, I have a blended family now, so that was kind of hard to get, but it can work. It can work.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Jump in.
I was going to say, she mentioned something, and if we're talking about like communication and how diverse families affect that, for instance, when she said blended families, because I grew up in a blended family household, but then when I married, I was blessed with a stepson. I don't call him my stepson, but I have a stepson. And I think it becomes I think part of the communication that was difficult is in the beginning was trying to learn your place as like stepmom. What can I say? What can't I say? Where you might find yourself holding things back or trying to keep conflict down, and because you're not really sure where you fit in. As you don't want to be viewed as I'm trying to take over as mother or not have a role at all. So I think just to hit on what she said, I don't know if I know anyone who doesn't have children that aren't from previous relationships or marriages in almost any Black family that I personally know.
So if you're describing the Black family, it's that each one of them is blended in some way.
Some kind of way.
Wow, that's
whether it's a stepchild, whether it's an adopted child, or whether it's like you said, somebody's raising someone, learning your place in that can be difficult.
As Chanel said with his uncle down the street. Go ahead.
I try to stay away from the step part of it.
Right.
I've always tried not to use that word.
Right.
And because I want everybody to feel that they're just one in one family.
Right.
Yeah. And it's difficult. I find myself, because we're also a blended family. And so I when I find myself talking to individuals about my oldest daughter, who is, and Mary, I'm with you, I don't like using step, but my oldest daughter, who is my stepdaughter, I almost pause because it feels so unnatural to say step. It feels so unnatural to say half brother. We didn't as in the beginning of chapter 1, when Serena's and Venus's older sister, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Aisha, was interviewed. She said, we're Black. We don't do the half. We don't have half brothers and half sisters. We're Black. And so, Mary, I resonate with what you're saying there. Anyone else? What do you think about when you think about the African American family?
Sir, I would like to say, this is Melanie.
Hey, Melanie.
I would like to say, how you asked the question, how would you describe the African American family? Yes. I would describe the African American family as a coat of many colors. Because when you see family now, you don't see just, when I was growing up, you seen all African Americans. That's not the same anymore.
Very good point.
It's blended, okay? Then now you see, as myself, I'm raising my grandson. And that was something that, it's normal now. Back in the day, if a young lady got pregnant, the mother would, grandmother would raise the child, and mother would, go off, do what he needed to do, and then come back. But that's not the case anymore. I've had my grandson 12 years. He sees his mom. He doesn't see his dad, but she'll come back and get him just like a puppy, or, spend a little time with him, and then she's off. So I just say that it's a difference. It's not how I was brought up at all.
So I and as you said that, as you were talking, Melanie, one of the things that jumped in my mind was when we say African-American family, if you look at my family, I'm married to a woman from Jamaica. So what is the African-American family? And I guess you say, well, you wrote the book, you should have a better, and you're the one using the term African-American throughout the book. But, these kind of conversations help to spark thinking, which is, what is it? Because if someone marries someone from Africa or marries someone from the Caribbean, that changes the dynamic from the traditional, or what many people refer to as indigenous African Americans or American descendants of slaves. It changes that whole dynamic. I want to hear some other thoughts. Share some other thoughts with me before we go into the next question.
I was going to jump back in really quick.
Come on in.
We mute ourselves in between, but my husband Kerry is sitting here with me next to me. He was saying that
I feel like we become diverse and adaptive as far as the family structure.
We learn how to adapt very fast.
Right.
As African Americans.
All right. I can't see him. And I want to assure you, he's a very handsome gentleman too, but I can't see him.
I was going to say that I agree with everyone, what they were saying. What I wanted to add to that was the word fluid. When you asked the question, that was the first word that came to my mind. And it just takes me back to any given funeral, wedding, or any other gathering that I would have with my family. And I would say Aunt so-and-so, who's really not an aunt, but a cousin or a cousin of my aunt. And so I think that we're fluid in that we adapt, like Carrie says, and we change based on the situation now, whether we're raising someone now or whether as we get older, we're living with someone else. I think that we transcend title is what I'm saying.
And this conversation is so important. First of all, Denise, you really crystallized a lot of the thoughts and things that Chanel and Melanie and others have been saying, just about how, I used the word fluid, just how fluid the African-American family is. It's a coat of many colors, as was said just a moment ago. Just as you think, this conversation is so important, because what is the definition of family? What is family? And I can throw that out to you if you want to answer it, but it just makes you think to yourself, what is the definition of family? As we're talking about improving the family, improving family communication, one has to step back and take a breath and say, okay, hold on, what is family? So I'm gonna put that out in the atmosphere, and if you want to address it, be my guest, anyone, or we can continue on. What is the African American family specifically? Or what is family? Or more specifically, what is the African American family?
Well, I look at family as, I even consider my friends as family, people that I care about. They're considered family. So when they come to my house, they know you're welcome. Make yourself comfortable. The first time you come to my house, yes, I'll wait on you. But after that, you just became family. So you on your own.
Yep.
I need you to go back and sit down. Go back and sit down.
One definition that I've heard of family, and I'm going to butcher the definition, but bear with me, is that anyone that we are in close, intimate, or emotional relationship with. So then family is more defined by the emotional connection than by the biological connection. Or rather, it's defined just as much. I don't say more. It is defined just as much by the emotional connection as it is defined by the biological connection. Gina, does that kind of is that kind of where you were going with your statement?
Yes.
Awesome. I would be interested in hearing some other thoughts. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to the next question? And by the way, I'm going through the questions 1, 2, 3, and I put them in the chat so that you can see them. So please click on the chat and you can see the various questions that are coming up, even the ones that's going to come up next. So don't feel that you have to answer whatever question is that we're on at that time. You can go back, forward, side to side, however works best, because we want to have a fluid, to use someone's word, we want to have a fluid conversation. So I'm going to push on to the next question, but we can continue to come back to the previous questions. And that is, how do you believe, as the book Seasoned with Grace, God's Recipe for Healthy Family Communication, how do you believe healthy family communication can help the modern family? And I think we all admit it, the modern family is a lot different than the traditional mother, father, and 2.5 kids. How do you believe that healthy family communication can help the modern family in general and the African American family specifically? More specific. Where does healthy family communication, some of y'all were touching on that a little while ago. I want to dig deep into it. Where does healthy family communication come into helping the modern family and the African American family in general, more specifically?
You know, I struggle with this question because there's 8 kids in my family, and I am considered the glue to try to keep everyone together. But then me and my father had this big falling out, and for like 30 years we didn't speak 2 words to each other. And now that when he got sick, my mother got sick, I became that caretaker. Now my sisters and brothers have cut off communication with me. They find reason to not talk to me. They can be in my area and they won't even stop by and say hello. So, and it's hurtful to me. So that's why I struggle with that.
I want to stay here for just a moment, because there are certain predictable ways that we respond and react when we're in family. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of those ways is what is known as withdrawing and cutting off. Withdrawing is just putting distance between yourself and someone else that you're in close relationship with. And the extreme of that is it's totally cutting off from the person. So that's why I always cringe when someone says, I just cut them off. I don't need to be bothered with them. Because, I guess when it comes to Facebook friends or whatever, somebody you only hardly know, you just accepted their friend request because y'all had 20 mutual friends. That's a little different. But when it comes to our close, intimate, biological and emotional relationships, that cutoff, that distancing can have some profound impact on us and on future generations, which we'll talk about when we get into chapter 1. But what you're talking about right now, Gina, is just that right there. It's that, how do we manage the tension and the anxiety and the stress and the conflict that's going on? And one of the ways to manage that is through distancing and cutting off. So I thought I would put that on the table. So
and it does get hurtful. It gets very hurtful because I basically raised my brothers and sisters, even though I was not the oldest. I'm the 4th child out of 8. But I was put in a position where I had to discipline. I had to cook. I had to clean. I had to do school paperwork and stuff. So I'm very close to my brothers and sisters. So I would say, that's fine. If y'all don't want to talk to me, that's fine. but it does still hurt in the end.
It does.
And to cut off, I have been going back and forth, and it's like, you know what, if something was to happen to me today, just bury me. Don't even let anyone know until after I'm gone. But that's not the right way of doing things.
Yeah.
So it's like it goes back to, how am I supposed to fix this? But I'm tired of fixing things. I want them to step up and try and fix it. If you have a problem with me, say something. Let me know what your problem is. So if it's something I did, I can fix it. But if I don't know what I've done.
I hope that as we progress in this book, we will begin to explore how to have healthy communication, even in relationships where the other person has no intention of maintaining communication or maintaining even the relationship itself. Because that is a very important skill to develop, but it is also a very difficult skill to develop because it's hard. It's very hard to do work when someone else has no intention of working with you. And some of you, even as I'm saying this, are starting to have memories of relationships that you've had with individuals where that was the case. You're trying to improve and trying to make things better, and all it's, it just seems as if the other person is seeking to sabotage it. And I hope that we'll be able to explore more. Gina just put out some stuff about communication and the two sides of it. One is when there is no communication. The other side is trying to improve what communication does exist. I want to hear a little bit more from some others about how do you believe healthy family communication can help the modern family in general and the African American family more specifically.
Dr. Davis, this is as Gina was talking, she mentioned one side of the communication, which is the cutoff side.
Yeah.
The other side to that is the confrontation side.
Yes.
And sometimes you just have to confront what it is. And then once you have that confrontation, then a decision can be made how to move forward, whether you want to stay in your cutoff lane or whether you want to reconcile. And it brought to my memory when I found out that I had a sister, an older sister. And I just found that out maybe 3-4 years ago.
Oh.
And I made it a point to go meet her for the first time. And I knew that it was going to be confrontational. I knew that there was going to be cutoff in a sense of denial and that sort of thing. But I was determined that I was going to put it out there and have the family do what they want to with it. And so I think one of the things when you're talking about healthy communication, when I decided that I was going to put it out there, I decided that I wasn't going to walk this walk alone. I went and found someone who could be a neutralizer to help kind of be the nucleus of the conversation. And it's always, I think, helpful when you're trying to get to a healthy communication space, when you know that there's going to be conflict, to find that neutralizer, to try to bring the family together to even have that conversation. And food always works.
It does. It does.
Food always helps, at least to bring the gathering together, to even begin to have the conversation. So, I always, when I know that it's going to be difficult, I always try to seek out that neutralizer in the family, that neutral ground who everybody likes to kind of rally around in starting that conversation, and a good old fish fry works.
You're getting me hungry. I want to stay with this for just a little bit with you, Gina, if you don't mind. Did your older sister have a challenge accepting that you were her sister, or were there other family members that had a challenge accepting it?
Oh, are you talking about me meeting my sister?
Yes.
There were other family members that had challenges. I accepted it. I was of the mind, I knew this day would come, and I actually thought it was going to come at a funeral, because that's usually what happens. Out where the bones are buried once you're trying to bury somebody. But it didn't, it actually did come out in a funeral. It just wasn't my dad's funeral. So it was my dad's daughter.
Okay.
I had no problem accepting, and she had no problem accepting me. Where some of the problem came in was with some of his brothers and sisters. It was a split, and including him. He denied it, and I'm not sure why, because it didn't disrupt anything. It was before me. It was before he met my mother. So it wasn't that kind of situation. I just don't know why he decided that he wanted to deny it. But he has 11, he's the 11th of 11 children. Half of his children accepted her. Half of his brothers and sisters accepted her that are still alive. And then there was half that didn't. And until this day, my whole goal was to put it out there that that she exists. And I left it up to them whether or not they choose to accept her or not. And then by us building our relationship, she became okay with that, because she had a connection that she never had before, and so did I. And we just hung our hat there.
So that hearing, and the reason I wanted to dig a little deeper into that story, because hearing the story that Gina just shared with us, or not story, but experience that both you and Gina have just shared with us, I want to go back and again unpack that question. As we look at how our families are, and I've heard so many stories over the years of individuals who met their siblings when they got old. I've actually know people that are in my age group, and I'm mid-40s, who will say, my father had a whole nother family on the other side of town. I mean, just a whole nother family altogether, next city over, or whatever it may be. I always found that like, wow, how were you able to maintain that secrecy? But realizing how complex the family is, going back to the question, how can healthy family communication build up these family realities, whatever they are? How can we utilize this tool, this gift, if you will, of family communication, to build up the family, no matter what it may be? A sibling that we didn't meet until we were already adults, or family members that are withdrawing from us, another. How can communication be a part of that? I'd be interested in hearing some of your thoughts.
This is Denise. I was going to say that I think one way is to avoid a lot of secrets. Just as Gina was sharing her experience, I think healthy communication, being transparent with one another, sharing experiences, passing down experiences to other generation helps to avoid some of the secrets, and therefore help build relationships.
And Denise, one of the things that my family is about is secrets. Is what happens in our home stays in our home. Not everybody needs to know about it. They don't want to talk about things. Everything has got to be a secret. And then when the secret is out, then everything just blows up. Me, on the other hand, I believe in saying, this is what's going on. This is what's happening in my household. And then I get the blunt end of it, like, you talk too much. No, people need to be aware, because if I'm not around and something happens, and then later on they find out, it's like, well, how come she never said anything? And I think that
You're right.
that goes way back to my great grandparents. You don't tell secrets, family dynamics of what's happening.
And this
Yeah,
is
sometimes dynamics, sometimes health, sometimes other things.
Definitely.
Right. I was going to say the same thing. It's important not to keep the secret because of health. You know, one of the things I found out when I met my sister, we had a lot of health issues in common, and she couldn't figure out why.
Mm.
Getting healed, but she couldn't figure out why she was having these issues, and not knowing all that time who her father was, she didn't have a way to trace back in her bloodline to see if there was pre-existing conditions in the family, if she was at risk because of the, you know, things that were coming through our bloodline. And so transparency is so important, but I think in the Black family, it's always been, well, I shouldn't say always, because my maternal side is not like that. We talk about everything, sometimes to a fault, but
Right.
but you know, transparency is everything. To being even just a healthy individual, let alone having a healthy family.
I'm about to come to Melanie, but I think this is a very good segue just to begin thinking about chapter 1 and how patterns are passed down from generations to generations. You know, if you think about the story of Adam and Eve, and we saw in there how, you know, that dysfunctional pattern began to replicate itself. You know, one of the things is embarrassment that causes secrecy. And how embarrassing must it have been for Adam and Eve? Now, we don't know if they kept this as a secret, but just even when they finally chose to tell their children, how embarrassing it has to be that we were kicked out of paradise because I had a conversation with a snake and he convinced me to eat the only fruit that God said I couldn't eat. You know, that's pretty embarrassing. And so for individuals who are victimized, especially if the victimizer is still alive, or if the results of the victimization is still around, it's difficult to have that conversation about what happened. There's a lot of embarrassment there. And then those patterns are reinforced and are passed down. And I'm not going to get off at this right now about how they're passed down generations. That's what we're going to really hit in on when we get to chapter 1. But that is what happened. I'd be interested. I want to come to Melanie and talk a little bit about communication, strengthening the family. How do you see communication as a tool that can strengthen the family and can begin to address some of the generational challenges that families may run into? And if Melanie, you're on mute, if you're still with us, if not, I'm gonna come to Mary because I'm gonna shoot the same question at you, Mary, because I haven't heard from you in a while, and I'm getting nervous. so Mary or Melanie, how can communication, healthy communication, help in strengthening those positive patterns from generation to generation? How can it help in breaking some of those generational curses, as we say in our community?
Well, I think you have to communicate, because if you're not careful, you're going to be dating some relatives. So
that's number one.
So that's my thing. So and as far as family reunions, and sometimes it's hard to get young people to come to family reunions. And I always tell mine that you need to come because you need to know who you're related to, because there was one instance where my nephew had started to date a girl that was his cousin, and he finally found out about it. Well, you know, you have to be open about certain things, even if it hurts.
Yeah, that's that can be quite daunting when you find out that that you've been dating your cousin. Boy. Uh so yeah, that as you talk about family reunions, I had a conversation with someone the other day about how, as I was growing up, family reunions were just like the all in all. They were so important. But I'm noticing that the older I get, my generation and the generation under me do not put the same value in family reunions. And so our children are growing up not knowing each other, like our second cousins and stuff. Our children are growing up not knowing each other, or just barely knowing each other from pictures or something, but no real connection. As you mentioned, my excuse me, as we talk about family reunions and how we used to come together, and it was a time where everybody played and carried on, just had a good time. Um, I'm wondering why it is that family reunions do not hold the same place of prominence in our community like it used to hold. And some of you may have different experiences, but I've talked to several people. All this is anecdotal, of course. I've talked to several people who have said that, they're noticing family reunions waning off, whereas they used to be every year. Now they're once every 2 years or once every 3 years. And even then, it's still not as well attended by different generations. I'd be interested in hearing the thinking through about just this whole dynamics of how family reunions have begun to wane.
I'm going to say, in my experience, family reunions, family reunions were really, really huge on my father's side of the family. Mm-hmm. Every 2 years we got together, and there would be hundreds of people. And I can remember being little all the way up until my teenage years. It was just huge. Um, we would get excited about going out of town. We would get excited about seeing our cousins and playing with our cousins for 3 days. And, if there was an amusement park, it was a thrill. And it was something to look forward to. And then as I became an adult, I got the experience of planning 2 family reunions. Because now, the older generations are settling down. They don't want to do it. It's a lot of work. And they're passing on the task to the next generation. So I was able to plan a couple of family reunions. But I noticed as becoming an adult, they got smaller. And so I started reaching out with social media, reaching out to all my cousins in my generation, like, hey, are you coming to the reunion? I haven't heard from you. We're planning this. And everybody had something to do. Everybody's child had soccer games, or they had, basketball, they had dance, everybody's child was involved in something, that some event was happening every weekend. And I just know in my experience, and that happened 2 family reunions over the course of 4 years, where I think as times change, just in my experience, as times have changed, children have become more involved in other activities. And family reunions aren't as exciting as what they have going on. When I was little, we didn't have a lot to do. Financially, you may not have been where, or even activities been offered the way they are now, but you didn't have a lot to do. So it was something to look forward to and to have fun. They're already having so much fun. So, they'd rather do what they're doing than drop what they're doing just to go see family they hadn't seen in 2 years. Because their family that exists to them in their mind is just what's in that home or their small circle. And I mean, that's just been my experience of it. People just having so much to do. Life is so much more busier now. And it seems like those things are more important than family.
Go ahead, Denise.
I was going to say it's interesting that Mitchie says that, because I was initially thinking maybe it's financing, but I don't think so. I think we have more money now than families did back then, and they scraped whatever they had to get together. But I wonder if technology has a lot to do with it, in addition to what Mitchie was saying about people just being busy. Number one, I think that we have moved further away from each other. And then number two, even to other countries, especially in my family, we have Canada, US, England, we're in different countries. And then also technology, we keep in touch on social media now. So what is the point of coming together in one place and spending all that money, for 3 days and leaving all that we have to do?
And to look forward to, yeah. Already doing it.
we're already posting pictures and showing people what we are doing. So family reunion was a time when you catch up and tell people what's going on in life and who died, who got born, who graduated.
Right.
And that is one of the dynamics as we begin to come to a close here. That is one of the dynamics that families just live geographically further apart than we used to live. And I'm wondering, and I have no research to support this, or at least I have not seen any research to support this. I'm wondering how much the further we get away from slavery. My grandfather, who was really instrumental in bringing our family together, his grandfather was a slave. So he was just one generation removed from slavery. If when he talked to his grandfather, he was talking to someone who was born and raised a slave. I'm wondering how much, as we get further and further away from slavery, the family becomes less as important because, again, coming out of the slavery experience, family was just everything because family was um, so fragile in the slavery experience. You didn't know when your family was going to get sold or whatever else might happen. So I'm thinking through this. I'm thinking out loud. I'd be interested in hearing what your thinking is on that. The further we get away from slavery, how that has an impact on how families come together. As we talk about the importance of family, importance of communication stuff on family. I open the floor. I'm going to hear some of your thoughts.
Well, on my paternal side, my father is the last, he's the end of his, I guess, what you want to say, generation. Everyone else are like his third and fourth cousins. They're down in Leesville and they don't know anyone. So they're at a loss. My grandmother, which was his mother, she was a child as a slave. So I got to hear a lot of stories because it was towards the end of slavery.
Yes.
And she never knew her mother because her mother died in a cotton field. She was a baby. So my father doesn't have a lot of stories to tell. On my mother's side, when we have our family reunion, we normally go for wherever state somebody's in. So every 2 years we meet up in those different states. When we make it down to Louisiana, which it was supposed to be this past summer, we were supposed to go. We always wind up down in Longview, at Longview Baptist Church, that's where my mother's family is buried. So we always tend to always go down there or go to church there. So it's a matter of not letting, when we go down on my mother's side, it's a matter of not letting us forget because that's where they're at.
That is
like always a reminder of where you come from, huh?
Right. And that was one of the things before my grandmother passed about 4 years ago. She said before she died, she said, if it's a problem, fix it. She said, there's no need in just trying to let it hang over. She says, we're family. We will always be family. So fix any issues that there is that's out there. And that's what my her brothers and sisters are very, very close knit. We've been meeting for the last 4 months over Zoom, but everybody still want to see each other. So they're hoping that things will be okay this year so that we can get together. And it's normally an average of like 160 of us.
One of the things as we get ready to look forward to next week and to close out today, as we look at next week, we're really going to be talking in depth about generations and how these things are passed from, and how the way our family functions, how close or distant, how we respond and react to tragedy, conflict, stress, etc. How how that is passed on from generation to generation is something that we're going to be talking about in depth next week. So I want you to look at, go back and kind of scan through chapter 1 again. I want you to really think about that term, pre-programmed, how we come into this world pre-programmed, and then how our mental or emotional computer has, various programs written on it. Think about it from a computer perspective, has programs written on it that impact how we operate, not to keep using the word function, but how we operate, especially in relationships. There's a lot of insight given to us from the book of Genesis, and I think we'll pick up right there. I want to thank each of you for your input and your stories. Before I go, is there anything that Melanie would like to share just before I leave? I'm going to put you on the spot one last time. Is there anything you want to share? I value your voice.
I just want to say that I've really enjoyed it tonight. I just want to say that I was discussing with my mother, and we were just talking about that, how our ancestors were grateful when they had nothing, and they prayed for us that we would have more than what they have. Now we have everything, and we have turned from God in different things. And it's so sad. He's so sad. That's all I want to say.
Well, we're going to be back here next week at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's 7 p.m. Central and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And I want to encourage each of you to be a part of that. If I can ask y'all just to stick around for one additional minute.